first we got to talk about this Cotton Bowl, Ohio State and Miami. And it's one of those, like, obviously no players on the field remember Ohio State and Miami meeting for the national title in the Fiesta Bowl after the 2002 season. But as an old person, maybe this is a sign that I am an old person now, because when I saw the two helmets next to each other, it just gave me a shock of nostalgia for that game.
The helmet game, Godfrey, as you call them, right? The helmet game.
Yes, like quintessential, right? Even though Miami was not a historic power until the 80s, it's absolutely a helmet game. I remember where I was, not yet a journalist, not that old, but I remember where I was when this happened. I remember when it happened. I can also assure you that a smattering of Buckeyes in my personal life have told me that on the off chance they meet a Miami fan anywhere in the world, this is still a point of discussion. So over under on times mentioned in the broadcast, I will say I'm going to give it 4 built in mentions on the play-by-play.
The name Glenn Sharp is going to come up quite a bit.
That was the pass interference, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Was
that's okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought. I couldn't. I know Miami played during that stretch for a couple of national championships, and so I couldn't remember if it was that one that was the pass interference. But yeah, I do remember as a high schooler at the time watching that game. This is a fun one. Ohio State was my pick to repeat again, but I'm having some worrisome thoughts over that, given the talent that Miami has and what I saw, how I saw their defense play against Texas A&M. I'm having a little concern, despite the talent that Ohio State had. I mean, this on the field, it's got to be, of the quarterfinals, it's got to be the most talented matchup. This is your people's world. Ari and the guys at On3 and the recruiting.
Yep. Stars matter, baby.
5-star talent on the field there is probably insane.
It is, and I think that's what's interesting about this, because when you look at the top end talent that Miami has, the 10-point spread feels a little big, because Ohio State's been great all year. Ohio State's defense has been dominant all year, but if we just go, potential first-round talent for potential first-round talent, Ohio State still has the most of anybody in the bracket. But Miami may have the second most, maybe Georgia. But, when you talk about Ruben Bain, Francis Mauigoa, these guys are absolute first-round talents. Malachi Toney can grow into that, and Bryce Fitzgerald can grow into that. They're only freshmen. That's the thing I'm so excited about, is the level of talent on the field, which harkens back to that Fiesta Bowl when nobody gave Ohio State a chance in that game because it was the Miami team coming off a national championship. They had so many pros on that team. But then when you go back and look at who played for Ohio State that day, they had a ton of pros on that team. That team was absolutely loaded. And I think this is one thing, if this winds up being a close game, I bet we look back in 4 or 5 years and some of the young guys on Miami wind up being big time, NFL draft pick type guys. And I think that's kind of the difference. And so we talked about it on my On3 show on Monday, and because my co-host Ari Wasserman is obsessed with the idea that Jeremiah Smith, his recruitment came down to Ohio State and Miami, and he was very close to picking Miami. He actually had Miami closed in his backpack on the day he announced. And if Jeremiah had picked Miami, then I think this spread would be completely different. I think it would be close to a pick 'em. But Jeremiah said the reason he didn't pick Miami is they didn't go play in games like this. So now they do, and you wonder, okay, if they could possibly pull the upset here in advance, does that mean the next Jeremiah Smith growing up in South Florida doesn't leave?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think this is, in terms of narrative function, far more important for Miami in terms of the next 3 to 5 years, because this would be the return that we have talked about or heard about from Miami and Mario Cristobal for years, or their boosters for 10 years, 15 years. But prior to that, even without winning the national title this year or even appearing in the game, I think this one game is sort of a micro referendum. What's interesting to me about this is that Malachi Toney was the difference against Texas A&M, right? When you have outstanding talent in important positions, that's usually the difference when everything else is kind of nullified, like it was in that A&M game. Then you're going to have an outstanding player make an outstanding play. That's what we talk about in college football. Everybody's got shooters on both sides of this. So I'm going to be really curious. You can't just rely on an outstanding player to go and kind of pull you out of the fire the way they did against A&M, because in certain situations the last couple of years, that's how Ohio State has operated as well. The more consistent team here is going to win, and I have absolutely no idea who that is, mainly because of the lack of test on Ohio State's side, and then just because of the general inconsistency of Miami.
And we've talked about this before, but like we saw nobody that had a bye last year win a quarterfinal, and this matchup strikes me as sort of like, in a way, the opposite matchup of what we saw last year, where Ohio State was sort of in Miami's place. They won a big first round game, and then came in and played Oregon that had been sitting for 3 weeks or so, and it kind of reminds me of sort of that situation. And I just wonder if Miami has picked up a lot of steam winning on the road against the SEC and in Texas A&M, and then just kind of continuing to steamroll. I don't know what the key matchup is here, but for me, especially after watching Miami's defense against Texas A&M, I do wonder if Miami's front can just get to Julian Sayin and put pressure on him enough to where he can't throw the ball to maybe two of the best receivers in the country. That to me is something I'm guessing that's going to shape the game.
Yeah, different game for Miami's front, because last week they had to corral Marcel Reed. They had to make sure Marcel Reed stayed in the pocket and didn't slip out and kill them there. This time, they're not necessarily worried about Julian Sayin doing that, but you got to get him on the ground because he's very accurate. If he gets the ball out, it's in Jeremiah Smith's hands or it's in Cornell Tate's hands, and you have a major, major problem. Now, I will say Miami's open field tackling was excellent, but it's one thing when you're doing it to some, there were good receivers at Texas A&M, but getting Jeremiah Smith on the ground by yourself is a totally different challenge than getting Casey Concepcion or Mario Craver on the ground by yourself. The other thing that I think Miami has to do, and I think this will decide the game, they're going to have to take some risks down the field with Carson Beck. They were extremely risk-averse offensively against Texas A&M because they knew if he didn't throw any interceptions, they were in the game. Their defense would keep them in the game. They're going to have to score some because Ohio State's going to score some. They will have to throw the ball down the field, and you risk a Carson Beck game on that front. But they do have talented enough receivers. They've got Malachi Toney, we mentioned him, Keelan Marion, C.J. Daniels. They have talented enough receivers to beat some good defensive players, and Ohio State has maybe the best ones down the field. So you have to kind of open it up if you're Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator, and let Carson Beck try to throw it down the field. And that is going to be a fingers crossed, gnash teeth moment pretty much every time.
Experience tells us that we should favor the older and wiser quarterback here, but Carson Beck's an interesting case because he hasn't been to the postseason with his team or this offense. He hasn't been to the postseason with Georgia, right? He was out last year when they played in the Sugar Bowl and lost to.
He played in the Orange Bowl, I guess, against the zombie Florida State team. But that's
right.
Florida State game.
So that's Andy. That's what I'm trying to figure out. What is the last truly big time game? Because he was injured in the SEC championship against Texas, right? Mm-hmm. And before that, it was probably the loss to Ole Miss or maybe the Georgia Tech game last year.
The loss to Ole Miss, at Texas where they won in the regular season last year.
It's been a while since we've had Carson Beck alert status because it's been a while since Carson Beck has been in a high platform game. Whereas then you have the less proven commodity on the other side who has been more consistent in a smaller body of work. I kind of like my hair brethren here saying to have that first A-list marquee moment game. He hasn't really had that yet. He hasn't had a chance to.
Yeah, he is so good at threading the needle, throwing into tight windows. And look, the defenses he's played other than Indiana's probably haven't been able to do much with that. So this will be a more talented defense than just from a top end standpoint than anything they've seen. I think Indiana's a more consistent defense, but they only scored 10 points against Indiana. They only scored 14 points against Texas. The Texas defense is the most similar to this So he has seen something like that. Texas has Colin Simmons, who's going to be a first-round draft pick. Texas has talent all over the defense, and that was his first start, and he ends up winning the game. So I do think Julian Sayin has seen this, even though he hasn't seen much of it.
Andy, the funny thing about mentioning Texas is I feel like the entire game plan, it was almost somewhat acknowledged, was we're going to let our defense win the game. We have a really young quarterback here. We're going to kind of play a really like type of small ball offense. And it almost has to be like, as you said at the top, the opposite here. So the Texas game is instructive in terms of talent and defense, but they can't go in there with that. If they come in hyper conservative here, I don't think they can win the game.
Yeah. Not to transition to our next one, but a segue. Man, the people at Georgia, they're not really big fans of a one Carson Beck. I'm sure they'll be even New Orleans.
I agree.
They'll be rooting against the Hurricanes like they have, it seems, all season. They are not fans here in New Orleans, the Georgia guys.
Imagine the storylines if Miami and Georgia get through this thing and they're playing in a semifinal. I mean, you've already got the Jeremiah Smith and Miami storyline. You'll have the Caleb Downs, by the way, because remember, Caleb Downs leaves Alabama, and then his choice comes down to Ohio State or Georgia. He's from the Atlanta area. So that was, you're going to get a lot of this, but the Carson Beck thing will dominate it. It will absolutely dominate it if Miami gets through. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens. I do think, how aggressive do the offenses want to be? The defenses are the stronger group in both of those teams.